Okay, welcome to everybody, if there is anybody out there in cyberspace. What we're looking at tonight is, as David has kindly mentioned, the study in a new book. This is a book written partly by me, but also by various members of the Thames Discovery Programme, which was launched way back in 2008, when we actually launched the Thames at War project. So those who are any good at mathematics will realise it's taking us twice as long to write the book as it did to fight the Second World War. But putting that aside, let's get on with the lecture. This is a project, a community-based research project, participatory research on London in the front line, as it certainly was between 1939 and 1945, particularly between 1940 and 1945. It's a story in some ways about military history, but it's very much from a non-combatant's perspective. So we're looking at how a community faced up to an atrocious war. The research has been done by the Thames Discovery Programme, partially research in the London Metropolitan Archives, and for which we're very grateful, particularly to Peter Kennedy for his unearthing of major work there, and also fieldwork on the Thames foreshore. You can see here the Thames Discovery Programme people on the site at Westminster standing on a large bomb debris scatter next to the embankment wall. So we're very grateful to these guys for the fieldwork which they did in the book, for the book. One of the major things that turned up in the book was the huge role played by the London County Council, or the LCC as they're known, who organised the plan for the saving of London. And one of the key instigators of the plan that saved London was a gentleman called Sir Thomas Pearson Frank, who was the LCC's chief engineer during the war years, an extraordinary character who had served in the Royal Engineers in the army in World War I and brought all that experience to bear on London in its darkest hour. An extraordinary guy who was able to be flexible, proactive and reactive, and did a huge amount to help Londoners save London from the bombing. Now, when war was declared, indeed just before war was declared in 1939, Pearson Frank was appointed with the title of Coordinating Officer for Roads, Utilities and Thames Flood Prevention. Now, I think most people would agree that's not the most glamorous of titles, and compared with flying Spitfires, fighting Rommel in the desert or storming the beaches of Normandy, it doesn't actually grab you. But we're going to look at roads, utilities and flood prevention and see how his enormously reactive, proactive and flexible work on coordinating those issues in a city under intense aerial bombardment actually did save London, a huge contribution to the Second World War as a non-combatant. Now let's unpick roads, utilities and flood prevention. In a war where a city is being bombed, buildings have a terrible habit of falling down into the street. And those roads, streets, have to be cleared. If you don't clear the roads, emergency services can't get through, food can't get through, buses can't get through, people can't get through. The city will literally grind to a halt and it would have to surrender very quickly. So what he was responsible, Pearson Frank was responsible for, was setting up the necessary army of people to get those roads cleared. And here you can see, I don't know if you recognize, that's Upper Thames Street. It's now another carriageway wide. And you can see the guys in the cloth caps in the bottom. These are the road repair gangs, all men too old for active military service, but not too old to spend their days and nights clearing streets of enormous amounts of rubble. A thankless task, but essential to keep London moving. So that's just a bomb which hits a building and makes a mess of the street. There's another thing about roads and bombing, which we need to remember, and that's a bomb in the road, a high explosive bomb which rips a crater in the road, not only makes it impassable, but takes out gas, water, electricity, phones and sewers. Every single bomb in the road was an engineering disaster. So if you look at the picture on the left, you can see the guys in the cloth caps getting rid of the debris in the bottom of the hole, and the guys on the top are all dressed in military uniform. They're actually non-combatants. 3,000 men from Wimpey's, Costains, etc., who Pierce and Frank conscripted into new companies of Royal Engineers whose work was to connect the utilities, reconnect the water, phones, gas, electricity, and mend the sewers to keep London functioning. So he raised his army of 3,000 engineers to help the road repair gangs keep London going. And once they've mended the utilities, then as you can see on the right, you can start filling the holes and get London moving again. So that was roads and utilities. A lot of people remember the 11th of January attack on Bank Tube Station, which took out in one go 7 roads which all meet at Royal Exchange, Bank of England. And please note that that attack happens on the 11th of January, and this road junction was completely cleared and functioning, and the booking hall at Bank Station mended by the 3rd of March. I make that about 8 weeks, and that's pretty good going. There you see, within a month of that bomb strike, look how clean those roads are, swept perfectly clean so the buses and people can get by. You can see the huge crater has been bricked up. You can see a Bailey Bridge, one Bailey Bridge already under construction and working, and a second Bailey Bridge, the foundations being set up to keep that 7-road junction functioning. So this is roads, utilities in action. And he was also very concerned with water, and he was both concerned reactively and proactively. He had 17 miles of water pipe, new water pipes laid across London to make sure the AFS, the Auxiliary Fire Service, had sufficient water until the bombs dropped in the road and severed his new pipes. He also therefore set up 80 static reservoirs in the basements of bombed out buildings, which then be sealed and then filled with water to give these guys the water they needed to fight the fires. And if that wasn't enough, because there was a tendency to use the Thames, but at low water you couldn't get your hoses in the Thames, he had 44 auxiliary pumping stations built against bridges and wharfs. And you can see one in the bottom left-hand corner. And if you look at the bottom of that screen, you'll see the water pipe still leading down to the low water mark underneath the concrete base for that auxiliary pumping station. That remained there till a couple of years ago when it disappeared with Thames Water's Thames Tunnel work. So he was doing his best to supply water very flexibly in a time when water was in very short supply. He also proactively realized that the bridges of London might be knocked out, and that would be very damaging to movement in London. So he had 3 emergency bridges built. This is him being proactive, as well as the 4th emergency bridge at Waterloo, which was being built while the war was continuing. So this particular one you can see here runs from County Hall, which is head office. It spans the Thames and runs to the Ministry of Defence and Downing Street on the other bank, and would function if Waterloo Bridge or Waterloo Bridge was put out of action. So this was him thinking proactively, what's going to happen if we lose our bridges in the war? And on top of that, his other great proactive visionary construct was to launch the Thames Flood Prevention Emergency Repairs Unit. And what that did was a Thames Flood Prevention Emergency Repair Unit, a rapid response unit that would go out in the middle of the night to mend breaches in the river wall caused by the Luftwaffe. The river wall was the river itself was the guiding map for the Luftwaffe. So if you could see the river, you dropped a bomb on it. You could hit a wharf, a warehouse, a power station, ships, a bridge. Why not just bomb the Thames? And that's what the Luftwaffe did. So the chances of a river wall being breached was pretty high. Now, the problem with the river wall being breached is that in 1928, just before Pearson Frank came to London to be the chief engineer, there was a very dramatic and catastrophic flood in central London. This was of natural consequence of a very high tide. Several people drowned in basements. There was no rapid response. There was no early warning. And as you can see on the left-hand side, the good people of Bermondsey had to invent their own rapid response team using old doors and horses and carts to try and save people who were in flooded houses and couldn't get out. Now, when the LCC was responsible for flood prevention in those days, and the LCC chief engineer singly failed to save London in the 1928 flood and quietly left office in 1932. Thomas Pearson Frank came into the office, and you can see on his desk in 1932 a big notice saying, "London will not flood again, will it, sir?" And his job was to make sure it didn't. So the war comes, the threat to London's river wall is enormous, so he proactively sets up a means of saving London from flooding. You're well aware of the fact, I'm sure, that water can be used as a weapon. In 1943, we all know the Dambusters took out 2 dams in the Ruhr Valley, which in one night, in one raid, which set back London German Nazi armament production, which the RAF were very proud of, but also drowned 1,500 civilians, which they're less happy about. Water as a weapon. Flooding would be catastrophic in London, which is so low-lying. Have a look at this picture. On the right-hand side, you can see the Angel pub in Rotherhithe. Look at the level of the pavement. Look at the level of the parapet. And imagine a Heinkel 111 dropping a high explosive bomb on that flimsy parapet 2 hours before high tide. What do you think is going to happen? When high tide arrives, London, low-lying London, is going to get flooded. However, we all know London was never flooded in the Second World War. Or was it? Were we told porkies? Well, it wasn't actually flooded, but it was breached. The river wall was breached over 100 times. Look at the background, look at the picture there. That's Darfield Wharf in Lambeth. Look at the size of that breach on the river wall, which has been choked with debris from the demolished buildings. Take away the debris from the demolished buildings and you'll have an enormous breach, which undoubtedly would have caused major flooding in Lambeth. This was in October 1940. One night, the entire parapet goes. Now, we don't know, or we weren't told, that London was very nearly severely flooded 100 times during the Second World War, because this was kept top secret. In war, everything is secret if we can, and it was kept very confidential because we didn't want the Luftwaffe to realize how vulnerable low-lying London was. We also didn't want to upset the public, who had a habit of sheltering underground in basements and tube stations. We wouldn't want them to get worried. They had enough to worry about with fire and high explosives. We didn't want them to worry about drowning. So Thomas Pearson Frank set up, before the first bomb dropped, 4 depots in the most low-lying areas of London to ensure that there was a rapid response unit in place, ready to go to breaches to the river wall. There's one at Battersea, in Battersea Park in the Stone Yard, one in Southwark Park. Battersea Park, by the way, did both banks of the river. In Southwark Park at China Hall Gate, looking at Bermondsey and Rotherhithe. One in Millwall at Pyramid Wharf to do Millwall right the way around to Stepney. And at Greenwich to do Woolwich, Greenwich and Deptford at Tunnel Avenue near the Blackwall Tunnel. There you see a photograph of Battersea Park with Chelsea Bridge on the east and Albert Bridge on the west. And you'll notice where the stone yard is in Battersea Park, one of the emergency bridges is being built to link the rapid response team to the bank at Chelsea on the other bank, to make sure that even if Chelsea Bridge and Albert Bridge were out of action, there would be a bridge which would enable that unit to operate on both sides of the Thames. Here are two more of our emergency depots. The red arrow underneath the Heinkel 111 is at Southwark Park, and these guys had to do all that bend of the river from Rotherhithe, Bermondsey, Rotherhithe, right the way round to Deptford. The other red arrow marks the Pyramid Wharf site, where the guys had to deal with Millwall, which got plastered in the Second World War. The Heinkel 111 is sitting almost directly over the Surrey docks on September the 7th, 1940. The warehousing and timber yards you can see still intact in that photograph, 5 minutes later, were all ablaze. So this is the last photograph of the Surrey docks before they disappeared forever. Now, at each of its depots, Pearson Frank had a standby unit 24/7 of a labourer, lorry driver and a watchman, ready, standing by the phone. But look at what he did next. He insisted that when the air raid sounded, a team of about 28 people arrived at the site ready to go. Not when the first phone call came, but when the air raid sounded. So they were there ready to go. And also, even if the air raid hadn't sounded, he had that team there on standby during high tide weeks, during the spring tides. So even so that they'd be ready when the air raid sounded. So half the time the team were there because the air raid had sounded, but during high tide weeks, the team were there before the air raid sounded, because high tides are a real problem if you're worried about floods. Now, this wasn't an overreaction, because we know the river wall was hit 121 times. In the first stages of the Blitz from 1940 to 41, from September to May 41, there were 80 strikes on the river wall, any one of which could have flooded London. Remember, there was it's only 76 days or nights, but 80 strikes. That's an awful lot of river wall breaching. If you look on the other side of the screen, you can see the silver Thames by moonlight, what would be called a bomber's moon. You didn't need to illuminate the Thames. You didn't need to have any street lights. You didn't need any maps. You could see the Thames from 1,000 foot, and you could drop bombs on it very easily. So hardly surprising that London, the river wall, was breached 80 times in the first stage of the Blitz, and another 30 to 40 times during the rest of the war, including, believe it or not, 15 doodlebugs, which were not even targeted on the river wall. They were just targeted at London. There were so many doodlebugs, 15 of them hit the river wall. We know all this now, but we didn't know this 10 years ago, because Peter Kennedy went into the London Metropolitan Archive and found the London County Council logbooks for the Emergency Repair Service. There were 2 of them, and if you open them up, they have an incident on each page, handwritten in ink, which records where the incident was, the date of it, a description, a very small description of what's been destroyed, and then when the temporary repairs took place, when the permanent repairs took place, how many sandbags were required, etc., etc., and how much it all cost. So those 2 pages are the history of one incident. So we've got 121 double-page spreads. The modus operandi of this unit ran from emergency repairs to temporary repairs to permanent repairs. The emergency repairs, what you do when the bombs are dropping. The temporary repairs, what you do for the next month after that. Those were funded by the London County Council's Thames flood teams. The permanent repairs, on the other hand, were the responsibility of the owner when they had enough money to deal with it. If they didn't have enough money because they were out of work and they just lost their warehouse, then the temporary repair had to last for 3 months, 18 months, 2 years, who knows? Emergency repairs simply require those old men from the road repair gangs to be up all night shoveling debris into the crater to block it up, to stop it flooding. You can see on that's Glengall Wharf, October, which is in April 1941. That's all the debris from the warehouses thrown into the crater and banked up to form a cordon around the perimeter of the crater to contain the site at high tide. So there's a lot of hard graft there by old men in the middle of the night while the bombs are dropping. The bottom slide shows you sometimes the warehouses there was so much in the warehouses, they blocked up the breach themselves. So the old men from the road repair gangs didn't have to stay up all night digging, piling up debris. So that's the emergency repairs. The temporary repairs are a completely different construct. Look at the size of this breach at Glengall Wharf. It's pretty big. Imagine the water pouring through there if it hadn't been blocked. So first of all, there was those are the men in the cloth caps who were worked all night to block it initially, and they were the same guys who went back for the next 6 weeks laying a sandbag wall, over 3,000 well-filled sandbags laid as bricks. They're not just chucked down there, they're laid course by course like a dry stone wall, so that they will withstand high tides for, in this case, 18 months. So this is not just, it's called temporary, but it's there for a sufficient time, in this case 18 months, to keep the Thames out. You can see the full team there, including their engineer. I don't know if you can spot it. He's the only one without a cloth cap, and he's tamping down the top of the latest sandbag wall. It's got to be absolutely level for the next level of sandbags to go on top of that, and the next one on top of that. These are very well constructed sandbag walls. They're called temporary repairs, but they're pretty splendid stuff. Here's another breach at Pimlico, way down in Chelsea Way. Look at the size of that breach. Again, there's been some debris thrown in to contain the site before the next high tide. And at the bottom slide, you can see some shattered concrete filling the center of the gap and some modern brickwork filling both sides of that. And below that, you can see the remnants of the old Victorian river wall underneath that filling. But look at the size of the concrete and the brickwork. That's the size of the breach, or the length of the wall that would have failed if a high tide had hit it. These are big breaches in low-lying areas. Here's a slightly smaller breach, but in an area which was very susceptible to flooding. This is right next to the area near Lambeth Bridge, which was severely flooded with 14 fatalities in 1928. You can see two very gnarled trees behind it, which took the full blast of the high explosive bomb. You can see this is the Victoria embankment. This is granite, and you can see it shifted quite a lot of the granite masonry. And once the river gets into that, it opens up the hole and makes it bigger and bigger and bigger. So this had to be dealt with fairly quickly. And the solution for this was the standard solution for permanent repair of coarse mix reinforced concrete. And if you look at the far slide, you will be able to see very clearly that we've got a huge gap in the river wall there. Right, so this is a colour photograph of the Second World War, and you can see underneath the scaffolding of the Victoria Tower the breach for the river wall under construction. Had that flooded, you'd have got a lot of water in the House of Commons, apart from anything else. The river wall there also has a concrete plinth behind it. This is also a 1940s concrete plinth made of reinforced concrete. This is what would have happened if London would have flooded, but of course it didn't, because between 1940 and 45, the Thames did not flood. It did in 1928, 47, 53, 68, 93, 98, 2000, 2003, 2006, 2014, but it did not flood when Pearson Frank was in charge and when there were 100 holes in the river wall. So he deserves our praise because he saved London from drowning. And this one little plaque does at least commemorate that huge achievement. We often think of war and victory as being the result of the armed services. And yes, we should indeed salute the airmen, sailors and pilots who did so much to keep those damn Nazis out. But let us also remember non-combatants. If you look at the image at the bottom, that's the impact aerial bombardment has on non-combatants. And if you look at the image on top of the screen, that's the response that Londoners had to aerial bombardment. They all got out there and did their very best. We have some commemoration of non-combatants who tried to save London. Two memorials, one for the ARP and one for the AFS. We know that people of all ages volunteered to help. Look at that image at the bottom corner of young, middle-aged and older women who joined the river emergency services with their blackout torches, their splints and their bandages. That's a propaganda image of everyone looking happy. This is a non-propaganda image of volunteer firemen having had yet another bad night in the middle of the London Blitz. Those are the guys, all those volunteers who saved London during the Blitz. They deserve medals. So the Battle of Britain was won by the few. The battle for London was won by the many. So I take my hat off to Londoners of that blessed generation who saved London by volunteer work. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much.